My name is Rebecca, and I'm 42 years old. 5 years ago, when I was 37, I discovered my father transferred $247,000 from our family business account to my younger brother without consulting me. Money I generated through 8 years of work without a single vacation day. 63-hour work weeks, blood, sweat, and countless missed holidays. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. I just waited for him to call me begging for financial help when his empire crumbled to dust just 2 years later. You won't believe what I said to him when that day finally came. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. I grew up in a middle-class family in Ohio. My father, Robert, built a small food distribution company from scratch. Even as a child, I could see the pattern forming. My younger brother, Jason, was clearly the favorite. While I worked in the warehouse after school at 16, Jason received a brand new car for his 16th birthday. When I went to college, I paid my own tuition working part-time jobs. 2 years later, my father paid for Jason's entire education without hesitation. Men need to be prepared to lead, my father would say whenever I questioned the obvious favoritism. You're smart, Rebecca. You'll figure it out. A good child works hard, and you've always been good at that. My mother, always submissive to his decisions, would only say, your father knows what's best for all of us. She passed away when I was 22 after a long battle with cancer. With her death, I lost the only person who occasionally stood between me and my father's relentless expectations. After she died, it seemed like part of my father died too, except when it came to Jason. I remember standing at her funeral, watching my father place his arm around Jason's shoulders. I stood alone, 3 feet away, invisible in my grief. That night, I cried myself to sleep clutching my mother's cardigan. It still smelled like her lavender perfume. Be strong, Becky, she had whispered during our last conversation. Never forget your worth. I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would become. The morning after the funeral, my father called a family meeting. I assumed it would be about grieving together or supporting each other. Instead, he announced, life goes on. The business needs to continue. He looked directly at me. Rebecca, we need someone to take over your mother's accounting duties at the office. You have a business degree. It makes sense for you to step in. I was still numb with grief. Don't I get time to mourn? The best way to honor your mother is through hard work, he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. A good child works hard. That phrase again, his ultimate manipulation tool. Jason, meanwhile, was told to take all the time you need to process his grief. He spent the summer after Mom's death on a European trip my father funded to help him heal. I worked through my grief in 15-minute bathroom breaks, crying silently in the employee restroom before returning to spreadsheets and invoice processing. My salary was barely above minimum wage. Your family, my father said. Your compensation is knowing you're building something for your future. I believed him. That was my first mistake. For years, I clung to the hope that one day my father would see me, really see me, that he would recognize my value not just as a worker, but as a daughter deserving of the same love and opportunities he lavished on Jason. Each night, I'd return to my small rented apartment while Jason lived in the house our father bought him as a graduation gift. I'd review contracts until my eyes burned, determined to prove myself worthy of the love that seemed to come so effortlessly to my brother. Just work harder, I told myself. Eventually, he'll notice. Little did I know then that no amount of hard work would ever be enough. Some people don't value what comes too easily. And to my father, my loyalty and dedication were as expected as the sunrise. What I couldn't see then, what would take me years and heartbreak to finally understand, was that the problem had never been about my worth at all. At 22, armed with my business degree, I returned home determined to prove my value. I joined the family business at minimum wage, while Jason, still in college, received a generous allowance just for learning the business during his summer breaks. For the next 8 years, I worked tirelessly. I arrived at 6 a.m. and left at 9 p.m. I secured new contracts that increased our revenue by 43%. I implemented management systems that saved $95,000 annually. Every Christmas, while Jason received expensive gifts, I got a card saying, "Congratulations on the good work. Keep it up." My father's praise was always conditional, always tied to performance. That's a good quarterly report, Rebecca. Next time, try to increase margins by another 5%. Nice work on the Miller account. Now see if you can get the Thompson contract too. Never just "I'm proud of you" or "you did great." Always with conditions attached. Although my salary improved gradually over the years, much of it went toward paying off the medical bills my mother left behind. The insurance covered only part of her treatments, and my father refused to use company money for it. Business is business, he said. What remained of my salary, I reinvested in the company, believing in the implicit promise that one day part of it would be mine. During my 3rd year with the company, my father called me into his office one evening. "Rebecca, I've been watching your work. You've shown real dedication," he said, his voice uncharacteristically warm. My heart leapt. Finally, the recognition I'd been craving. "That's why I'm granting you a 15% ownership stake in the company," he continued. I was stunned. "Thank you, Dad. This means so much to me." He nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with the emotion in my voice. "Well, you've earned it. And your mother would have wanted you to have a stake in the business." It was the first time he'd mentioned my mother in months. Later, I would learn that her will had stipulated that I receive a portion of the business, something my father had initially tried to contest, but ultimately conceded when his lawyer advised against it. This 15% became my lifeline, my proof that I belonged in the company that consumed my every waking hour. I clung to it like a drowning person to a life raft. Every morning, I'd watch Jason stroll in around 10 a.m., coffee in hand, chatting with employees who quickly learned to laugh at his jokes if they wanted to stay on the boss's son's good side. Late night, I once asked him after he arrived at 11:30. "Dad understands I have a social life," he replied with a smirk. "You should try getting one sometime, sis." I bit my tongue and returned to my spreadsheets. Meanwhile, Jason's personal life seemed to move at warp speed compared to mine. At 26, he had a lavish wedding to Melissa, a socialite he'd met at a charity gala. My father spared no expense, renting out the city's most exclusive venue. A year later, they welcomed a daughter, Emma. My father immediately set up a trust fund for his first grandchild. "Family is everything," he said at Emma's christening, while I stood in the background, apparently not included in his definition of family. My few attempts at dating were short-lived. How could I maintain a relationship when work consumed every waking hour, when every minute away from the office felt like a betrayal of my responsibilities? "This is the 3rd time you've canceled," my last boyfriend said before walking out of my life. "Your family business isn't going to keep you warm at night, Rebecca." He was right, but I couldn't see it then. My mother's medical bills were a constant reminder of what happens when you're vulnerable. $237,146 in total. The insurance covered $89,000. My father contributed nothing. "Your mother chose that experimental treatment," he said when I asked for help. "That was her decision, not a company expense." So I paid, month after month, watching my meager savings disappear into the healthcare system that failed to save her. Jason, meanwhile, never contributed a dime. "I'm still building my future," he'd say when the topic arose. "Dad says I need to focus on my career path right now." The weight of it all, the unequal treatment, the financial burden, the constant need to prove myself settled into my bones like a cold that never quite goes away. Still, I persisted. I believed that dedication would eventually be rewarded, that merit would ultimately matter more than gender or birth order. I was wrong. The truth waited for me like a predator in the tall grass, patient and inevitable, ready to tear apart the illusions I'd built my life around. But for now, I continued to work. I continued to hope. I continued to believe in the fundamental fairness of a world that had shown me nothing but its sharp edges. If I'd known then what waited for me on my 30th birthday, perhaps I would have run while I still had the chance. By my 28th birthday, I had transformed our small regional business into a multi-state operation. Our annual revenue had grown from $1.2 million to $3.7 million. My life consisted of work, occasional dinners with my best friend Amber, and sleep. Nothing more. One evening, after closing a particularly difficult deal with a national chain that would increase our revenue by another 22%, I waited for some acknowledgement from my father. "Good job, Rebecca," he said without looking up from his computer. "Make sure the contract details are properly filed." No celebration. No bonus. Just another task to complete. That night, Amber listened to me vent over wine in my tiny apartment. "Why do you keep doing this to yourself?" she asked, refilling my glass. "You're brilliant. You could be running your own company by now." I stared into my wine. "It's the family business. Mom would have wanted me to help. Your mother would have wanted you to be valued," Amber countered. "When was the last time you took a vacation, or went on a date, or did anything just for yourself?" I couldn't remember. The next morning, I arrived at work to find Jason using my office for a meeting with potential clients. My carefully prepared presentation materials were scattered across the desk. "You don't mind, right?" he said with that familiar smirk. "Dad thought it would be good for me to take lead on this one." I swallowed my anger and worked from the break room, hunched over a small table meant for employee lunches. When the client signed with us, my father took Jason out for a celebratory dinner. I wasn't invited. I buried myself deeper in work, taking on additional responsibilities without additional compensation. I revamped our entire inventory system, saving the company $63,000 in the first year alone. I developed relationships with suppliers that got us preferential pricing, increasing our margins by 7%. Each achievement was met with the same response: good work, keep it up. During this time, I discovered that Jason had been given a company credit card with a $10,000 monthly limit. I had to submit expense reports for even a $20 business lunch. Jason needs to entertain clients, my father explained when I questioned the disparity. It's different. Different. Always different. On rare occasions, I saw glimpses of my father's inner conflict. Once, after a particularly successful quarter, largely due to my efforts, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know, Rebecca, you remind me of myself sometimes," he said quietly. "The dedication, the drive." Before I could respond, he cleared his throat and added, "Jason could learn a thing or two from you about work ethic." These moments gave me hope, misplaced hope, as it turned out that he might eventually see me as Jason's equal. I stopped arguing. I stopped questioning. I just worked. Every night I'd come home to an empty apartment, too exhausted to even heat up a proper meal. I'd fall asleep on the couch, laptop still open, only to wake up at 5 a.m. and do it all again. My health began to suffer. Chronic headaches, weight loss, dark circles under my eyes that no concealer could hide. "You look terrible," Amber said bluntly during one of our increasingly rare dinner meetups. "This job is killing you, Becky." "I'm fine," I insisted. "Just a little tired." But I wasn't fine. I was disappearing into my work, becoming nothing more than a function, a tool to be used until it broke. Yet still, I believed that one day it would all be worth it, that my father would finally see me as an equal partner, worthy of the same opportunities and respect he gave so freely to Jason. I lived for the small moments of approval, the rare occasions when my father would nod at a report or acknowledge a new client acquisition with something approaching pride. Like a starving person subsisting on crumbs, I convinced myself that these tiny morsels of validation were a feast. Have you ever worked so hard for someone's approval only to realize it would never come? Drop a in the comments if this part of my story resonates with you, because what happened next would finally open my eyes to the truth I'd been avoiding for years. Everything changed on my 30th birthday. After 8 years of total dedication, my father called me into his office. Finally, I thought, he's going to recognize my work. "Rebecca, I'm very proud of what you've accomplished here," he said, seated in his leather chair. "You've truly understood what it means to work hard." My heart raced. Finally, the recognition I'd been seeking for so long. "That's why," he continued, "I want to make your position as operations director official." I smiled briefly, but something in his tone made me hesitate. "Thank you, Dad," I replied cautiously. "Don't thank me. You earned it," he smiled. "Oh, and I also want to inform you that Jason has graduated. He'll be the new CEO and will own 60% of the company." My smile froze. Jason, who had never worked a single day in the company, would be my boss and majority owner? The injustice was so clear that I was momentarily speechless. "And what will my share be?" I managed to ask, keeping my voice steady. "You'll keep your current 15%, he answered, as if offering me a great gift. "The rest stays with me for now." In that moment, I thought of my mother. She always said that one day my father would recognize my value. She was wrong. The room seemed to tilt sideways. 8 years of sacrificing everything: my health, relationships, any semblance of a personal life for this? "I see," I said, my voice hollow. "This is good news, Rebecca," my father said, frowning at my lack of enthusiasm. "You're getting the title you've been working toward." "And Jason gets the company," I replied flatly. My father's expression hardened, but I caught a flicker of something else behind his eyes. Guilt, doubt. It vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "Jason is my son. He carries the family name forward." "And what am I?" I asked, surprising even myself with the question. He blinked, genuinely confused. "You're my daughter, of course. Just not the one who matters," I said quietly. His face softened slightly. "That's not fair, Rebecca. You've always been valuable to this company. Without you, we wouldn't be where we are today. Valuable, not loved, not respected. Valuable like an asset on a balance sheet." "When does Jason start?" I asked, changing the subject. "Next Monday. I'll announce it at the staff meeting." I nodded, stood up, and walked to the door. "Rebecca," my father called after me. "Happy birthday." I closed the door without responding. In the restroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. I hardly recognized the woman looking back at me, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. When had I become this person? When I returned to my desk, there was a small gift box waiting for me. Inside was a silver pen with the company logo engraved on it. The card read, to many more years of success. Dad. The same pen he gave to all executives who reached 5 years with the company. Not a personal gift, a corporate milestone recognition. That night, I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. Instead, I pulled out an old photo album my mother had kept. Pictures of me as a child, winning science fairs, graduating with honors, always achieving, always trying to earn the love that should have been freely given. On the last page was a note my mother had written before she died. Remember who you are, Rebecca. Your worth isn't measured by others' recognition. I'd forgotten that. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself in the desperate quest for my father's approval. As I closed the album, my phone rang. It was Amber. Happy birthday. Please tell me you're not still at the office. I told her about my father's announcement. That's it, she said firmly. I'm coming over. This calls for emergency ice cream and a serious conversation about your future. When she arrived, she found me already pulling out my laptop. What are you doing? She asked. Updating my resume, I replied. The seed of change had been planted, but it would take 7 more years before it finally bloomed. This promotion marked the beginning of a new chapter, 7 long years as operations director, where I continued running the company while Jason played CEO. He'd breeze in for important client meetings that I'd prepared, take credit for my strategies, and disappear for weeks to develop new business relationships on golf courses and yachts. During those 7 years, Jason's marriage to Melissa fell apart. They divorced when Emma was 3, and Jason's visits to his daughter became increasingly rare. His priorities were clear. Himself first, always. Meanwhile, I continued to excel in my role, expanding the business to neighboring states and increasing our annual revenue to nearly $10 million. Each success only seemed to reinforce the status quo, Jason as the figurehead, me as the workhorse. By the time I turned 37, I had long stopped expecting recognition. I had made peace with my role, or so I thought. But something was about to change everything. 7 years after my promotion, when I was 37, something finally pushed me over the edge. The company had just recorded its most profitable quarter ever, largely due to a new distribution contract I'd secured after months of negotiations. During the executive meeting to discuss the quarterly results, Jason announced budget cuts across all departments to increase profitability margins. These cuts will include a freeze on all bonuses and raises, he declared, not meeting my eyes. After the other executives filed out, I confronted him. The company just had its best quarter ever. Why are we cutting budgets? Jason smirked. Strategy, sis. Dad and I have some major investments planned. What investments? I asked. This is the first I'm hearing about it. Above your pay grade, he replied, closing his laptop. Operations directors don't need to concern themselves with high-level financial strategy. Something in his tone, the casual dismissal combined with the smug certainty that I wouldn't challenge him, broke something in me. 7 years of suppressing my anger, of accepting my place, suddenly felt unbearable. That evening, I decided to investigate exactly what investments they were planning. As operations director, I had access to most company records, but there were certain financial documents that only my father and Jason could view. I noticed discrepancies in our main account. Several large withdrawals without corresponding invoice numbers, each just under $50,000, small enough to avoid triggering the dual signature requirement for large transactions. I needed the complete transaction records to understand what was happening. My father was traveling, and his office was locked, but I knew where the spare key was kept. In the digital file, I found 5 suspicious transfers from 6 months earlier, totaling $247,000. Searching for the corresponding physical documentation in my father's confidential office archive, I discovered a folder marked Estate Planning. Inside, I found the signed authorizations from my father to transfer the money from the main corporate account to a personal account in Jason's name. The justification: advance on future profits for investments. Money that came directly from the profits I had generated with contracts I had closed. In the same folder, I found a document from 3 years ago, a will where my father had left the family home, our only real asset, exclusively to Jason. In the corner of the document, a handwritten note. Rebecca will always manage. She knows how to work hard. The family home, the one my mother had lovingly decorated, where I'd grown up, the last physical connection to her would go to Jason, who had barely lived there after college. I took photos of everything with my phone. My hands trembled, but my mind was strangely calm. I discreetly consulted a lawyer friend who confirmed that the transfers were legally questionable since they weren't properly documented as dividends or loans. You could potentially sue, he told me, but it would be costly, time-consuming, and would likely destroy both the company and any relationship with your family. Plus, your father could claim these were advanced distributions against future profits, which might be legally defensible given his controlling interest. That night, I looked at my mother's photo on my nightstand. You were right, Mom, I whispered. It's time to take care of myself. The magnitude of the betrayal was overwhelming. Not just the money, though $247,000 was a staggering sum, but the calculated way they had hidden it from me, the casual disregard for my contributions, and most painfully, the proof in black and white that I would never be seen as an equal. 7 years I had continued hoping things would change. 7 years of telling myself that if I just worked harder, achieved more, proved myself beyond any doubt, my father would finally see me as worthy. The realization that nothing would ever be enough hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was done waiting for approval that would never come. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since my mother died, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one I reserved for meeting our most important clients. I styled my hair, applied makeup with precision, and even put on the pearl earrings my mother had left me. Today, I needed her strength. When I arrived at the office, my father was already there, coffee in hand, reviewing some papers at the conference table. "You're looking nice today," he commented, barely glancing up. "Client meeting?" "No," I replied, setting my bag down. "I wanted to talk to you about something I found yesterday." His expression didn't change, but I noticed his fingers tighten slightly around his coffee mug. "Oh? What's that?" I was finalizing the quarterly report and noticed some discrepancies in the main account. So I checked the transaction records. Now he looked up, his eyes narrowing. "You were in my office?" "I needed the files to do my job," I replied evenly. That's when I found the transfer authorizations. 5 separate transfers totaling $247,000 to Jason's personal account, each just under the dual signature threshold. My father set his coffee down slowly. "Those transfers were a business decision, Rebecca, not something you needed to be consulted on. A business decision to transfer company profits to your son's personal account? Profits generated largely by my work? The money is still in the family," he said dismissively. "Jason is investing it for his future, for the future of this company." "What investments has he made so far?" I asked. My father hesitated. "That's between Jason and me." "I also found your will," I continued, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "The note you wrote about me was particularly illuminating." Color drained from his face. "You had no right to look at those documents. And you had no right to steal my future," I countered. 8 years of working myself to exhaustion to build this company, then 7 more years running it while Jason played CEO. For what? So you could give everything to Jason anyway? For a moment, he looked genuinely conflicted. "Rebecca, it's complicated. The business world, it's still a man's world in many ways. Jason will face challenges you don't understand." "Don't patronize me," I said coldly. "Jason has never faced a challenge in his life that you didn't solve for him." "You don't understand how business works," he said, standing up. "Jason needs capital to establish himself, to build connections, to represent this company the way a leader should. And I don't? Because I'm a woman? Or because I'm just the reliable one you can always count on to pick up the slack? That's not fair, Rebecca. You've been compensated for your work." I laughed bitterly. Compensated? With a salary barely above market rate? While Jason gets gifts, trips, a house, and now nearly $250,000 of company money? You've always had a roof over your head, food on your table. "I paid for those things myself," I interrupted, "with the money I earned. Money you consistently underpaid me while telling me I was building something for the future, a future you never intended to include me in." He rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. "What do you want, Rebecca? A bonus? Fine. I'll authorize $20,000. The insult was so profound I almost couldn't breathe. 15 years of dedication, $247,000 stolen from under me, and he thought $20,000 would make it right. "I want what I've earned," I said quietly. "Equal ownership with Jason, and back pay for all the years you underpaid me while I essentially ran this company." My father stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "That's ridiculous. You can't possibly expect—" "Why not? Because I'm your daughter, not your son? Because I didn't go to the right schools or play golf with the right people? Because Jason is my heir," he snapped, finally revealing the truth that had always lingered beneath the surface. The word hung in the air between us. Heir. Not because Jason was more qualified, not because he had worked harder, simply because he was the son. I nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over me. "I see. Thank you for finally being honest." "Rebecca," he began, his tone softening, realizing he'd said too much. "No," I held up my hand. "Don't. At least now I know where I stand." I turned and walked back to my office, closed the door, and began drafting my resignation letter. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. The truth, however painful, was freeing. I was finally seeing my situation clearly, without the distortion of hope or familial obligation. My phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Lunch today? I'm near your office." I typed back, "Yes. And bring your realtor friend. I think I'm finally ready to buy that condo we looked at." It was time to build something for myself. That night, I sat in my small rented apartment while Jason lived in the house my father had bought for him, and made a decision. I opened my laptop and began drafting a business plan for my own consulting firm. I carefully reviewed my employment contract. As expected, there was a non-compete clause, but it was poorly written and only prohibited working in the exact same segment, food distribution. A business management consultancy would technically be a different field. The next day, I walked into my father's office and placed my resignation letter on his desk. "What's this?" he asked, confused. "I'm leaving, Dad. I'm starting my own business." He laughed. "With what money? With which clients? You need this company, Rebecca." "Actually, I think it's the other way around," I replied calmly. "As a minority shareholder with only 15%, I have few options besides leaving. Thank you for teaching me that a good child works hard." I learned the lesson. Before I left his office, I turned back to him. "Oh, and I know about the $247,000 you transferred to Jason, and about the will." The color drained from his face. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of seeking approval from someone who would never truly give it had finally lifted from my shoulders. That afternoon, I cleared out my desk. Employees watched in confusion as I packed 15 years of my life into a single cardboard box. "You're leaving?" asked Maria from accounting, who had been with the company since before I joined. "Starting my own consulting firm," I told her with a smile. Her eyes widened. "Really? Wow. What does your father say?" "He thinks I'll fail," I answered honestly. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in. "For what it's worth, we all know who really runs things around here. If anyone can succeed, it's you." By the end of the day, 3 employees had discreetly asked if I might be hiring soon. At home, I set up a makeshift office in my dining area. My savings weren't substantial, $43,000 after years of paying my mother's medical bills, but it would be enough to rent a small office space and sustain me for a few months until I secured clients. Starting a business wasn't as simple as I'd imagined. There were licenses to obtain, insurance to purchase, marketing materials to create. Each step cost money I couldn't afford to waste. I spent hours researching the most cost-effective solutions, making every dollar count. I spent the weekend creating a website, business cards, and a formal business plan. On Monday morning, I signed a lease for a modest office downtown. My father called that evening. "This is ridiculous, Rebecca. You're throwing away everything we've built." "Everything I've built," I corrected him. "And I'm not throwing it away. I'm finally building something for myself. You'll be back in a month when you run out of money," he predicted. "This little tantrum won't get you anywhere." "It's not a tantrum, Dad. It's a business decision. Just like your decision to transfer $247,000 to Jason without consulting me." He was silent for a moment. "I always thought you understood what family means, what loyalty means." "I do understand. That's why I stayed for 15 years, working myself to exhaustion while you gave everything to Jason. But now I understand something else too. Loyalty should go both ways. Jason is family too," he said defensively. "Yes, he is. The difference is, you actually treat him like it." I ended the call before he could respond. That night, I created a LinkedIn profile announcing my new venture. By morning, I had messages from 3 former clients asking about my services. I was careful in my responses, mindful of the non-compete clause. "While I can't work directly in food distribution," I wrote, "my new consultancy focuses on operational efficiency and management systems areas where I have extensive experience that could benefit various industries." It was a fine line to walk, but I was determined to stay on the legal side of it. The last thing I needed was a lawsuit from my father. The first month was the hardest. I had one small client who took a chance on me, but the income barely covered my office rent. I began to wonder if my father was right, if I would fail and be forced to crawl back. No, I refused to let that happen. I would live on ramen noodles before I'd give him the satisfaction. If you've ever had to make a difficult decision about your family, leave in the comments. Your support means a lot to me. This was just the beginning of my journey. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, it was my road to choose. "Rebecca, you're overreacting," my father said when he confronted me in the parking lot the next day. "Everything I did was to protect the family legacy." "What legacy, Dad?" "The legacy of exploiting your own daughter? Of making her believe her value depends on how much she works? You don't understand how business works," he replied, irritated. "Jason is a man, he needs—" "Stop," I interrupted. "I don't want to hear more excuses. I'm leaving, and although I can't take clients directly due to the contract, everyone knows who really maintained those relationships." "You can't do this!" He shouted. It's betrayal! No, Dad. Betrayal is what you did to me all these years. What about your share in the company? He asked, trying to intimidate me. I'm keeping my 15%. When the company is worth something again, let me know, I replied, getting into my car. Driving home, I thought about how my mother had faced her cancer with dignity, never letting the disease define who she was. Now it was my turn to face my own battle with the same strength. The first month of my new business was harder than I'd anticipated. Despite interest from former clients, many were hesitant to fully commit. My father had apparently been making calls, suggesting I was unstable and my new venture was doomed to fail. I worked from my small office, a converted storage room above a coffee shop. The rent was affordable at $750 per month, but a far cry from the executive suite I'd left behind. Each morning, I'd arrive at 7 a.m., make a pot of coffee, and begin cold calling potential clients. Each evening, I'd return home exhausted, but with a different kind of tiredness, the satisfaction of building something of my own. The learning curve was steep. I'd spent years running operations for my father's company, but had little experience with sales, marketing, or the dozens of administrative tasks that come with owning a business. I made mistakes in an advertising campaign that ate through $5,000 with minimal results, a pricing structure that undervalued my services, a poorly negotiated office lease. Each failure taught me something valuable. I adjusted, adapted, and kept moving forward. 6 weeks in, I landed my first major client. A regional grocery chain I'd worked with at my father's company reached out directly. "We miss your insight," the purchasing director told me over lunch. "Things haven't been the same since you left." "My contract has a non-compete clause," I reminded him carefully. He smiled. "For food distribution, we're hiring you as a management consultant to optimize our operations." Completely different service. The distinction was narrow but important. I wasn't helping them source or distribute food products, I was advising on their internal systems and processes. My lawyer confirmed this would likely hold up if challenged, though it wasn't without risk. I spent 2 weeks analyzing their processes, then delivered a comprehensive efficiency plan that would save them $178,000 annually. When I presented my findings, the CEO was in attendance. "This is exceptional work," he said afterward, shaking my hand. "Who else is on your team?" "Just me. For now," I admitted. "Well, you've done what 3 previous consultants couldn't. We'd like to put you on a monthly retainer." Just like that, I had steady income. Within days, word began to spread. Another client called, then another. My father showed up at my office unannounced one afternoon. He looked around the small space with undisguised contempt. "So this is what you left us for? This closet?" I continued typing on my laptop. "Did you need something, Dad?" "Jason is struggling with the Miller account. They're threatening to cancel their contract." Of course they were. The Miller account had been my relationship from the beginning. "That's unfortunate," I replied, still not looking up. "You could help," he said, his tone softening slightly. "Come back as a consultant. We'd pay you well." Finally, I met his gaze. "You want me to fix Jason's mess?" "I want you to help the family business," he corrected. "The business Jason owns 60% of? The business I worked 15 years to build? Only to be given 15%? He sighed heavily. "Rebecca, this stubbornness isn't like you." "You're right," I agreed. The old Rebecca would have dropped everything to help, regardless of how she was treated. The new Rebecca values herself more highly. Is that what this is about? Money? I told you we can discuss a consultant fee. It was never about money, Dad. It was about respect, recognition, being valued for my contributions instead of taken for granted. He looked genuinely perplexed. "I always valued your work, but not me," I said quietly. "Never me, just what I could produce for you." For a moment, something like realization flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the business-like expression I knew so well. "The Miller contract is worth $1.2 million annually," he said. "Think about what you're turning down." "I am," I replied. "I'm also thinking about what I'm gaining. Self-respect is worth more than any contract." After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. 15 years of seeking his approval, and I'd finally stopped caring whether I had it or not. The liberation was dizzying. In the weeks that followed, I received increasingly desperate calls from both my father and Jason. The company was faltering without me. Major clients were canceling contracts because they refused to work with Jason. "Please, Rebecca, we need you," Jason begged over the phone. "We can renegotiate your share. How about 30%? "You need me now?" I replied. Funny how things change when money starts running short. My father tried another approach. "Daughter, we always knew you were talented. That's why I need you to come back. The company is your legacy too." "My legacy?" I laughed bitterly. "You stole my legacy when you transferred $247,000 to your favorite son? Money that I generated. Now I'm building my own legacy. Their lawyer contacted me with a formal offer to buy back my share in the company. The value was insultingly low, but I kept the offer. It might be useful later. Meanwhile, my own business was growing steadily. I hired my first employee, Maria, the accountant from my father's company who had quietly supported me on my last day. She brought valuable insights and, more importantly, first-hand knowledge of exactly how the family business operated. "Your brother fired 3 people last week," she told me over lunch. Good people who had been with the company for years said they were disloyal for questioning his decisions. I shook my head. What kind of decisions? "He's cutting corners on quality control, changing suppliers to cheaper alternatives without considering reliability. The operations are a mess since you left." I felt a pang of sadness for the employees caught in the middle of this family drama. They hadn't done anything wrong. "If you know anyone looking for a position, send them my way," I told her. "I can't hire everyone, but I might be able to help some of them." Maria proved to be invaluable not just for her accounting skills, but for her connections. She knew every vendor, every client contact, and every employee who might be looking for a change. She became my right hand as the business grew, eventually becoming our CFO as we expanded. "You're different as a boss," she told me one day after we'd landed a particularly challenging client. "You actually listen to ideas. You give credit where it's due." "I learned from my father's mistakes," I replied simply. Hiring was a significant financial commitment. Each new employee meant salary, benefits, office space, equipment. I ran the numbers obsessively, making sure each hire would generate enough revenue to justify the expense. I grew more cautiously than I might have wanted, but sustainability was my priority. By the end of my 3rd month in business, I had 3 employees and an office that no longer felt cramped. My client list was growing, primarily through word-of-mouth referrals. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Rebecca Carter," I answered. "Ms. Carter, this is Thomas Wilson from Northeastern Food Distributors." My heart skipped a beat. Northeastern was the largest distributor in our region and my father's biggest competitor. "What can I do for you, Mr. Wilson?" "I've been hearing good things about your consulting work. We're looking to optimize our operations in the Ohio region. Would you be interested in discussing a potential collaboration?" Working with my father's competitor would be the ultimate statement of independence. It would also likely sever any remaining chance of reconciliation with my family. "I'd be happy to meet," I heard myself say. "When works for you?" We scheduled a meeting for the following week. As I hung up, my phone immediately rang again. This time, it was my father. "I just heard from Tom Wilson," he said without preamble. "He's approaching you for consulting." News traveled fast in our industry. In our small business community, executives dined at the same restaurants and belonged to the same country clubs. Word about Robert Carter's rebellious daughter starting her own firm had been the talk of the town for weeks. "Yes, we're meeting next week," I confirmed. "You can't do this, Rebecca. They're our biggest competitor. It would be a direct betrayal of your family." "I don't work for you anymore, Dad. I can meet with whoever I want." "If you do this," he said, his voice low and threatening, "you're no longer my daughter." The words should have hurt. Instead, they clarified everything. "Dad," I said gently, "I stopped being your daughter the moment you decided Jason was the only child who mattered. I'm just finally accepting what you've known all along." This time, I was the one who hung up first. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I was finally grieving the relationship with my father that I'd never truly had and never would. The meeting with Northeastern went well, but I approached it cautiously. I made it clear that while I could help optimize their systems, I wouldn't share any proprietary information about my father's company. They respected my ethics, and we signed a contract the following week. It was a significant milestone, my first client that had no connection to my previous work. A client I had earned entirely on my own merit. As my business grew, so did my confidence. The woman who had spent years seeking validation was disappearing, replaced by someone who knew her own worth. 6 months later, my consultancy had 5 employees and a growing client list. Though I couldn't directly approach my father's clients due to the non-compete clause, many sought me out on their own after hearing about my departure. I rented a small but elegant office downtown and, for the first time in my life, was completely in control of my destiny. That's when I received the news. My father's company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Jason had made risky loans and lost major contracts. My father appeared in my office without warning. "Rebecca," he said, with tired eyes and grayer hair than I remembered, "I need your help. The company is sinking." "What happened to all that money you transferred to Jason?" I asked calmly. He looked at the floor. "Jason invested it all in a cryptocurrency scheme that promised quick returns. He lost every last cent when the platform collapsed." The full story came out slowly. Jason had met a financial advisor at a golf club who convinced him to invest in a new cryptocurrency that was guaranteed to multiply in value within months. Without doing any due diligence, Jason had transferred the entire $247,000 into the scheme. When my father questioned him, Jason insisted it was a sure thing. 3 months later, the platform vanished overnight, along with thousands of investors' money. The FBI was investigating, but there was little hope of recovering any funds. I trusted him, my father said, his voice hollow. I thought giving him that responsibility would make him grow up. Instead, it enabled his worst instincts, I replied. Just like you've always done. He didn't deny it. Rebecca, please. This is different. The company your mother helped build. Don't. I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't use Mom to manipulate me. She would be heartbroken to see how you've treated me all these years. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to ensure the company's future. By giving everything to Jason, how did that work out? He had no answer. What exactly do you want from me? I asked finally. Come back. Help us restructure. Save the company. As what? An employee? A consultant? Or as an equal partner with Jason? He hesitated. We can discuss terms. No, I said firmly. No more discussions. No more vague promises. If you want my help, Jason steps down as CEO, and ownership is split equally between the three of us, 33.3% each. That's not. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. He stood there, conflict evident on his face. For a moment, I thought he might actually agree. Then his expression hardened. You're being unreasonable. Jason is still my son, and I'm still your daughter. The difference is I've proven my value to the company while Jason has nearly destroyed it. He made mistakes, my father admitted. But with your help, my help comes with conditions now, Dad. I'm not that desperate little girl seeking your approval anymore. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. You know, you're a lot like your mother. She was stubborn too. For the first time in our conversation, I smiled. Thank you. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about the choice I'd just made. I could have gone back, could have saved the family business. But at what cost to my self-respect? To the new life I was building? My phone rang. It was Amber. Hey, I just drove by your dad coming out of your building. Everything okay? Everything's fine, I replied, surprised to find it was true. Actually, I think everything's finally exactly as it should be. That weekend, I put an offer on a small house, nothing fancy, but mine. As I signed the paperwork, I thought about how far I'd come from that exhausted, undervalued woman who had worked endless hours for a father who would never see her true worth. Congratulations, homeowner, the realtor said, handing me a set of keys. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I later learned that my father had listed the family home for sale to try to save the business. The house where I'd grown up, where my mother had lived until her death, would soon belong to strangers. It hurt more than I expected, but I understood it was necessary. Sometimes the past needs to be sold to pay for the mistakes of the present. 2 years passed. My company grew steadily and sustainably. I now had 12 employees and had moved to a larger office space. My approach was deliberate and cautious. I'd seen firsthand what happened when businesses expanded too quickly without proper foundations. Maria had proven herself to be an exceptional CFO, implementing financial controls and helping me make strategic decisions based on data rather than emotion. She'd become not just a colleague, but a friend. Your father called me again, she told me one morning. Offered me twice my salary to come back. Are you considering it? I asked, genuinely curious. She laughed. Not a chance. I actually enjoy coming to work now. The family business was eventually sold for a fraction of its original value to pay off debts. I accepted a revised version of the buyout offer for my 15%. The value had tripled since the initial proposal, though it was still less than fair. Even so, it barely covered my investment in lawyers to ensure the transaction was legal. I invested most of the money back into my company, using it to upgrade our technology and hire 2 specialists who brought new expertise to our services. The remainder went into a college fund for my niece Emma, Jason's daughter, who was now 5 years old. After Jason's divorce and subsequent move away, his visits with Emma had become increasingly rare. She shouldn't have to suffer for her father's mistakes. Then, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. Rebecca? It was my father's voice, weaker than I remembered. I need your help. I've lost everything. The house, the company. Jason moved to Colorado and doesn't answer my calls. When the money ran out, he simply ran from his responsibilities. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, a touch of satisfaction, and then finally, compassion. What do you need, Dad? I asked. Money, he answered. Just until I get back on my feet. I promise I'll pay you back. I took a deep breath and replied, be good and work hard, exactly as you taught me. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Then, without saying anything more, he hung up. I sat with my phone in my hand, wondering if I'd been too harsh. Part of me wanted to call him back, to offer help despite everything. The daughter in me still craved his approval, still wanted to be the good child who worked hard, but the businesswoman I'd become knew better. My father needed to face the consequences of his choices, just as I had faced mine. A week later, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Jason. Dad's staying with me now. He told me what you said. Real classy, sis. I almost laughed at the irony. Jason, who had abandoned our father when the money ran out, was now judging me for not coming to the rescue. I typed back, I'm glad he's with family. Take care of him. 3 days later, my father called again. Rebecca, he said, his voice different somehow, humbled. I've been thinking about what you said. Oh? I kept my tone neutral. All those years, I kept telling you to work hard, to be good, but I never saw, he trailed off. Never saw what, Dad? How hard you were already working, how good you already were. His voice cracked slightly. I took you for granted. The admission stunned me into silence. I'm not asking for money anymore, he continued. I wanted you to know that I see it now. Too late, probably, but I see it. Something tight in my chest began to unravel. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. It's never too late to start seeing things clearly, I said finally. I'm sorry, Rebecca, for everything. The words I'd waited decades to hear. They didn't magically heal all the wounds, but they created space for something new to grow. Thank you for saying that, I replied. Jason isn't actually letting me stay with him, he admitted after a pause. He said he would, but when I arrived, he claimed his roommate situation made it impossible. I'm at a motel now. Of course Jason had lied. Some things never changed. Where are you staying? I asked. He named a budget motel on the outskirts of town. I have a spare room, I heard myself say. It's not much, but you're welcome to it. Temporarily. It's just an offer, Dad. Take it or leave it. After a long pause, he said, Thank you, Rebecca. I'll pay rent, of course. We'll figure it out, I replied. When I hung up, I wasn't sure if I'd made the right decision, but I knew it was my decision to make, not driven by a desperate need for approval, but by compassion on my own terms. My father moved into my spare room the next day. It was awkward at first. We circled each other carefully, two people with too much history and too many unspoken words between them. But slowly, day by day, we began to build something new. Not the relationship we should have had all along, but something more honest, more equal. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was working to earn his love. The money I received from selling my shares back to the company before it was sold gave me a sense of closure. It wasn't about the amount, which was far less than I deserved, but about finally cutting the last financial tie to a past that had held me captive for too long. Today, 3 years after that phone call, I'm 42 years old and run a company with 50 employees. I've implemented fair work policies, offering my employees what I never had: recognition, growth opportunities, and work-life balance. Maria, my first hire and now our executive vice president, oversees our expanded financial services division. Remember when it was just us in that tiny office? She sometimes says with a laugh. Look at us now. My father eventually found a job as a manager at a small store. It's not the empire he dreamed of, but it's honest work. It was difficult for him to accept a position as a manager after owning his own business for decades. But necessity is a great teacher. Humility came late for him, but it came. We speak occasionally. Our relationship will never be perfect, but there's a new mutual respect. He no longer lives with me. After 6 months in my spare room, he saved enough for a security deposit on a small apartment near his job. On the day he moved out, he handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked. The rent I owe you, he said. I kept track of every month. I tried to refuse, but he insisted. I need to do this, Rebecca. For myself. I understood. It wasn't about the money, it was about reclaiming his dignity, about showing that he could keep his word. On my office desk, I keep a photo of my mother. Sometimes I think she would be proud of what I've become, not for the financial success, but for finally finding the courage to value myself. Jason finally had to work hard for the first time in his life. The last I heard, he was selling insurance in Denver and still trying to find the next life-changing investment. He rarely calls our father, and never me. His relationship with Emma remains distant at best, with months passing between visits. Some relationships can't be repaired, and that's okay. I've made peace with it. I do keep in touch with Emma, though. She's 8 now, And I make sure to send her birthday and Christmas gifts each year. I want her to know she has family who cares, regardless of her father's choices. As for me, I've learned that working hard is important, but working hard for people who truly value you is what makes the difference. I've learned to set clear boundaries and recognize my own worth. Growing my business from 1 person to 50 wasn't easy. There were months when I worried about making payroll, clients who paid late, projects that went over budget. The path to success wasn't a straight line. It was a series of ups and downs, lessons learned from both triumphs and failures. Unlike my father's company, which had been built on hierarchy and favoritism, I created a culture of transparency and collaboration. Every employee, from entry-level to executive, has a voice. Performance is recognized based on results, not relationships. This morning, I received an email from my father. He's been taking night classes at the community college studying accounting. At 67, he's reinventing himself. "I wanted you to be the first to know," he wrote. "I passed my certification exam, starting my own small bookkeeping service for local businesses. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I think I finally understand what you meant about building something for yourself." I smiled as I read his words. Not because everything was magically healed between us. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but because we had both found our own paths forward. Last month, I was invited to speak at my old university's business school. The topic was building resilient businesses. As I looked out at the audience of young, ambitious faces, I shared the most important lesson I'd learned. Success isn't measured by how hard you work for others' approval. It's measured by building something that reflects your own values and vision. A young woman approached me afterward. "Your story really resonated with me," she said. "I've been working in my family's business, but they don't see my contributions. I'm afraid to leave, but also afraid to stay." I recognized myself in her, the hesitation, the hope that things would change, the fear of walking away. "The hardest step is believing you deserve more," I told her. "Everything else follows from that." Sometimes in life, the greatest act of love is walking away from people who don't recognize your value, even when they're family. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to build something new. Working hard is important, but working hard for the right reasons and the right people makes all the difference. My name is Rebecca. I'm 42 years old, and I finally understand that my worth was never dependent on my father's recognition. It was inside me all along, waiting for me to claim it. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. And remember, you don't need anyone's permission to value yourself. That's a decision only you can make. Thank you for watching until the end. Share your own stories in the comments. We're all learning together on this journey.